Well, China is reevaluating its Belt and Road lending program with the Belt and Road 2.0. This new initiative will reassess now projects and financing. More specifically, China will now accept some financial losses and renegotiate some of its debt. This is something that the communist state has never been open to until now. And the previous infrastructure program led the major financial losses for China. Tens of billions of dollars, in fact, went down the drain, and major projects went on pause because developing countries weren't able to repay their debts back to China. Meanwhile, Chinese energy companies are reselling U.S. liquefied natural gas exports. Well, where exactly? Europe, Japan, and South Korea. Reselling natural gas has allowed China to make hundreds of millions of dollars in profit so far. In fact, China's ENN natural gas company is expected to make between, get this, $110 to $130 million in profits on just one shipment to Europe. Well, China has been positioning itself to become an alternative gas supplier to the world for a while. This is after Russia cut off its gas supply from the Nord Stream pipeline. Well, Senior Fellow and Director for Chinese Strategy at the Hudson Institute, Michael Pillsbury, joins me now. Michael, it's good to see you. All right, China at it again. What do you make of this new Belt and Road Initiative 2.0? I was looking up how much 150 countries, just as 150 countries, owe them $1 trillion. 60% of those countries are now in financial distress. So it looks like they did need to retool this.
Well, that's right. They have to retool it, but also in many cases they have collateral and they have agreements, so they can seize control of a port or other concrete assets that countries have that are in default to China. In fact, that's one of the original suspicions a lot of us had, is the Belt and Road Initiative's real goal was not as a handout to the poor countries of the world. It was, in fact, to get them in China's debt so China could have increasing control, especially of rare earth resources, oil, gas, and in our case, we don't support or we don't belong to the Belt and Road program ourselves as a country. But a similar pattern seems to exist in the U.S., where they try to buy high-end food processing plants like Smithfield Ham. There's just a long list of things the Chinese seem to want to acquire in the world. And I've argued, Lyndsay, that the reason for that is they're trying to build their own world order, where they are the center of the world, and they pretty much control the main resources and the main sources of capital in the world. I think they're well on their way to succeeding.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, you've studied China for quite some time now. It was interesting to me to see that China is reaping profit from U.S. oil. Why would the U.S. allow the government to do this? It seems like we are handing them an opportunity to make money when we are beholden to them ourselves.
Well, that's right. A lot of our government officials don't see China as a problem or a threat. They're continuing basically a 50-year strategy we've had, that a strong China, a prosperous China is in America's interest. That's still the dominant policy. And a lot of Americans don't agree with that, probably the majority. Some members of the House and Senate want to change it. But to a large extent, the federal government is still on a kind of hold or inertia that China is our friend, let's not block anything they want to do. I don't subscribe to that school of thought. I think it's dwindling in influence, but we're still stuck there. A lot of Chinese investment in America, Lyndsay, has been not only land and food supply, it's also focused on our high-tech companies. And up until a couple of years ago, we did not monitor or approve Chinese investment in high-tech companies unless the American company voluntarily came into the Treasury Department and said, please review this agreement. The law was changed. President Trump signed that new law. And now companies can be investigated before they buy or sell their own technology to China. But that was a big effort to change that. It took a lot of bipartisan discussion. So I'm pretty negative still on our being able to maintain our #1 place in the world and our freedom and liberty, because the Chinese are just so smart at manipulating and using our own internal differences. There's still a very strong pro-China lobby in America.
Yeah, and they're in it for the long game. As you know well, you wrote a book on it, essentially. What do you think that the U.S. fundamentally misunderstands about China And what can we do to hold them accountable? Because it seems like between COVID, between fentanyl, them buying up land, what they're doing with Russia, there hasn't been really any ramifications for their actions.
Well, I was going to mail you a free copy of my book, The 100-Year Marathon, but you already know the main theme of the book. What we seem to not be able to understand is just how clever the Chinese are and how open we are as a society. There's been one estimate recently that the American investment in China is going up. It may have reached a total of $2 trillion. So while we, at the rhetorical level, we often condemn the Chinese for all kinds of human rights violations and genocide against the Uyghurs, but in the real world, we still can't hold China accountable. So when you mention something like COVID in the Wuhan laboratory, we just don't seem to have the leverage to force China to open up their records and say, this is the lab leak that happened, we're very sorry, we owe you damages. We just don't have the leverage to do that, or probably worse, Lyndsay, we don't have the political will to take these kind of new policies toward China.
If you were advising this administration on China, I don't have that much time left, but what would be one of your key suggestions that you would say we really need to adjust this right now?
Well, this may sound like something trivial, but actually I've been advocating, and some of the Biden team want to do this. I've been advocating we need an annual competitiveness report to see just how fast China's closing the gap to surpass us. We don't measure that now. So in lots of little ways, we know they're beginning to surpass us. But if there were a presidential speech on China that mentioned we are now falling behind in supercomputers, in a sort of a long list of technologies, and in other indicators, it would bring about more of a bipartisan consensus that basically, oh my God, we are not number one anymore in so many areas, and we better do something about it. But I cannot find people who want to do that because they're afraid it will expose just how much of a threat the Chinese are to have this kind of competitiveness annual report. So it sounds trivial.
Got to shed some light on this.
It won't pass.
No, it sounds like a great suggestion. I think they need to take it up. I hope someone from the Biden administration is watching right now. It's so good to see you, sir. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Lyndsay.